Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and there's a saying on the internet that keeps getting repeated every year. Is it the year of the Linux desktop? Now, I've made a video where I just, goat see Microsoft on a fair bit. I mean, to be fair, that GTA hackers got my attention mostly for now. But I haven't really been covering a lot of Microslop because, to be real with you, they keep fucking up like every week, okay? Like, it's kind of getting difficult to keep track of what they fucked up and what they haven't. But, as somebody that, is a Linux user, I kind of look at things like Microsoft's Windows from like, how you look at a train wreck, you look at a car crash, it just keeps going on, and you're like the bystander from like the other side, you're just looking at it like, holy shit, somebody save those people. So, you throw some of the people over there, you throw them a rope, the rope has little penguins on it, some people look at that and go, ooh, Linux, fuck that shit, I'd rather die. And then there's some people who are like, oh my god, the grass really is greener on the other side. They grab the rope, and I make videos where I teach you guys how to install Linux, how to configure Linux, how to get stuff running. Because hey, if you climb over the rope, if you come over to the penguin side, I promise you, for most people, it's actually a pretty fun time. Now, the year of the Linux desktop is a pretty massive statement, okay? It's a huge saying. It's probably as old as some biblical sayings at this point, okay? Every year, there's a little bit of hopium and copium stuffed into people's bloodstreams from individuals who think that Linux is gonna take over. So obviously, listen, we've all seen the actual charts. We've all seen the graphs, okay? To give you an idea, Linux is kind of up there. Windows' market share is dropping, not crazy, but based on July 2026, Linux has been going up to like 7.53%. Now that is kind of an insane metric, and I'm going to be completely real with you to sort of burst the bubble. I don't think it's an honest metric. I don't think that many people have switched over to Linux. I think a lot of it is mostly people who fire up AI agents underneath Linux and then use them to browse the internet that is presenting itself as a web browser running in a Linux container. So for most of the internet that uses these kind of statistics to gather, because the way that these sites work is that they kind of have their identifiers, they have their like sort of cookies on their trackers on various websites all over the internet, and they just sort of keep a running tab of that guy is on Windows, that guy is on Mac, that guy is on a cell phone, that man is on Linux, that guy is a fucking freak using FreeBSD, okay? It's that simple. Your user agent is what gives you up. I could pretend to be a Macintosh on this Linux system, and some of these sites, they wouldn't be the wiser. So I don't like to use these metrics as accurate examples. I think it's good for clickbait and headlines, but it's terrible for presenting the reality to the actual audience. But I've been using Linux for about 6 to probably 8 years now. One of my earliest videos was talking about gaming virtual machines. I walked you guys through a gaming virtual machine where I set it up underneath Debian, I passed through a graphics card. I basically wanted to play a PUBG malware, and I was like, how do I show this malware works and have the ability to play the fucking game? Oh, just run it in a virtual machine, which is what I did. And for a while when I switched to Linux, that virtual machine was so important to me. It really was. It was the only way for me to switch to Linux and have the ability to play a lot of the games that I was actively playing with some of my best friends. Today, those same virtual machines you're witnessing on my channel, ladies and gentlemen, well, not exactly the same, but kind of migrated over the years. Those are all effectively going to be deleted. So as you can see right over here, delete, and it's gone. Yeah, I deleted the virtual machines. It's fucking over. Why? Because I think Linux is good enough. I think it's there. For the last couple months, a lot of countries like France, for instance, have sort of been changing their usage of Microsoft Windows, especially in the government, over to Linux. The French government wants to reduce dependence on foreign vendors across many layers of its technology environment. The migration plans are expected to cover desktop systems, collaboration tools, antivirus, AI systems, databases, virtualization, and network equipment. And beyond just that, even China, for instance, is also following with its own version of Linux distributions. I've even covered military Linux distributions from places like the Russian Federation, the Chinese, where they have their own distributions that their fucking military uses, like Astra Linux. In fact, even North Korea has Red Star OS. Linux, because it's an open source operating, kernel, it's shared around and used pretty much by the entire world. What started as a sort of humble operating system is effectively the only reason that you're actually able to watch this video right now on the internet. The video you're watching is powered by a server running on a Linux system. So even the Chinese, who plan to make the move because they're afraid of data security concerns, yeah, a lot of places still use Windows XP. I wouldn't necessarily say it's Windows that's the problem, it's just some places that are using old-ass software. But for any country, for anybody that wants to sort of split themselves away from American control, they can start to look at avenues where they take a free open source project and turn it into something that eventually can power millions more computers around the world. Even when it comes to like hobbyist shit, for instance, too, it's kind of crazy to think that Linux has sort of been here for about 35 years as of like yesterday. So it's been kind of crazy that Linux has been around for so fucking long. Now the question is, but Muda, what version of Linux do I switch to? There's like hundreds of them. And if you look at this list really carefully, ladies and gentlemen, I do tend to show this from time to time, but in the last 6 months, out of the most popular Linux distributions, exist CachyOS, which is what I actually used to use towards the beginning of this year. There's Mint, which I've actually shown you how to install on my channel, MX Linux, which I've never touched, Pop! OS, which I despise, Debian, which I used to showcase that virtual machine footage, Zorin, Fedora, which I currently use, Ubuntu, EndeavourOS, and Bazzite, which I showed you was running on the actual Muda box system. Now, there's a lot of names in this list that I don't recognize, or actually are pretty new to my actual view, which is things like Pika OS. A lot of this stuff is being sort of pushed at this point by a lot of gamers, a lot of individuals who are choosing to install Linux as a counter movement to Microsoft Windows. Now, I've told you, listen, you gotta get rid of Windows, okay? Windows is a terrible operating system that is run by a company that literally just wants to AI slop the next fucking thing to existence. This is a company that is slowly but surely forcing you to constantly require internet services to use their operating system and then in turn use your own computer. And at the end of the day, the quality for Microsoft Windows, in my opinion, is dropping like a rock. The reality of it is Linux is not perfect, and it's an operating system that definitely has growing pains and issues. For instance, using Fedora that I use on a day-to-day basis, there are issues with things like my graphics drivers. Sometimes games really don't work. Sometimes there's days where I'm like, shit, I really wish I could have had that piece of software running, but it just doesn't exist. But those days, that frustration that I've had for years, every so often, is happening less and less now that I realize that a vast majority of people, a lot of individuals on the internet, are not only promoting Linux, but they're making it easier to switch to. Now, I've seen a lot of content creators talk about things like, you need to switch to Linux right now, and then you need to go to Linux, and there's a lot of content centered around one specific distro that I kind of saw, which was Omarchy. Now, I've talked about this in the past myself, and to give you an idea, this is a beautiful, modern, opinionated Linux by a man known as DHH. Now, again, I fired up this actual operating system, and it's really nothing special. At the end of the day, it's basically Arch Linux with a pre-configured, environment that basically works off of something known as Hyperland, which is a tiling Windows manager. Now, DHH is an individual that is controversial, to say the least. I didn't really know about this controversy until I actually started looking into him, but he was an individual that people bring up a blog post all the way from September 2025, where he talks about, his opinions, his viewpoints, his political expressions about how London was lost. There's a lot of people that are non-native, so to speak. And it was this actual blog post and, several other mentions that a lot of people who don't share his viewpoints were like, I don't know if I want to fuck with a guy known as DHH. Now, again, DHH is somebody that I brought up because Omarchy did something that I think is important in the viewpoint of Linux, right? No matter what you have to say or don't want to say about this guy, this is an individual that is raising money for this. Actually, in the last few days, I saw the eye-watering amount of $10 million brought in with individuals like Drew Houston, owner and co-CEO of Dropbox, Peter Steinberger, creator of OpenClaw, for instance. So two pretty big projects. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this is money that's going towards making Linux on the desktop actually happen. And any money is actually good money in this case, right? Any money that can help Linux flourish is actually important. Now, would I ever use something like Omarchy? Abso-fucking-lutely not. I don't really think this is a great system. I think at the end of the day, it's basically a Arch Linux sort of pre-built, if you will. I don't really appreciate a lot of these systems that ultimately are pretty much mostly vibe coded from what I've been able to see, from what I've been able to gather. But ultimately, look, at the end of the day, it's your fucking choice. If you want to run Omarchy, you can run Omarchy. You know what you can also do? You can run shit like Pico. You can run Among Us if you wanted to. Among Us OS. You could run Hannah Montana Linux. It's really your computer. If you want to install this shit and you think it's cool, if you fuck with the style, dog, it's up to you. You do what you need to. I think Linux has gotten so easy for a lot of people that for me, I actually recommend that if you want to get into Linux, go to fedoraproject.org. Go over here, download their latest release, which is number 44. I went with the KDE Plasma Desktop because it's the best sort of user interface for me. But again, if you want to do what you do what you need to, baby. I don't really care, man. It's your computer, dog. You get to decide what you want to do. That's the beautiful part about Linux, right? Microsoft gets to tell you every day how they get to fuck you in the ass, okay? Here, you decide how you get fucked in the ass, okay? Do you want to have broken NVIDIA drivers there? Do you want to have broken software here? Do you want to have an experience that is broken there, but at least you made it your way and you can fix it in your own way? It's like modding a Bethesda game, okay? At the end of the day, it's a cool experience. It's kind of more a platform, and eventually you'll get to the promised land that you seek. Anyways, so I download Fedora KDE, and the installation is pretty simple, very similar to how I did the Muda box downstairs. Very easy to install. And one of the best parts is, for a lot of these Linux distributions, some of them actually allow you to install them without even really needing the internet in the first place. So you can get from the install boot all the way to actually running the computer far faster than you could ever do with Windows or Mac OS. It's kind of mind-blowing to see how things can be when they're de-bloated this hard. Now, what's really important about how much Linux has grown is over the last several years, when it came to things like playing video games, it used to be that when I wanted to game underneath Linux, playing a brand new game was something that almost felt like a myth, right? Again, there would be a lot of issues. The way that Linux gaming works is through something known as Wine, which is not an emulator. It's actually a way for you to translate Windows calls over to Linux compliant calls. So you can kind of run Windows software underneath Linux. Now, it doesn't mean that through Wine you can run everything perfectly. There's still a lot of software that people use on a day-to-day basis, things like Photoshop, things like Adobe Premiere, the entire Adobe suite for crying out loud, professional software, software that is only existed on Windows and Mac and probably is used by millions of people around the world but refuses to release cross-platform. That kind of stuff may not run underneath Wine. You really have to try it case by case. But for a lot of games, companies like Valve have kind of spearheaded projects like Proton, which is taking Wine and allowing it and fixing it and modifying it in such a way that playing a game like Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, a game literally released, I believe this year? Was it this year? No, it was last year, I'm pretty sure. This game is one of the most, I guess you could say visually appealing games, right? It's like an Unreal Engine 5 game with modern ray tracing and all that shit. And back years ago, pre-COVID, I would have been yeah, this shit ain't running on the Linux system day one. What am I, fucking high? Now you can actually just run this, hit that green play button, and as it fires up through Proton, provided you have up-to-date hardware, you get a similar, if not in some cases, a better experience than raw Windows. A Windows game is running better underneath my Linux box than my actual Windows system back over there. It's crazy worlds we live in. But what makes this even cooler? Obviously, there have been projects that I've talked about, throughout this entire year, which are things like Winboat, for instance, where, again, I showed you how to run this on your system, where it basically creates a Windows container and runs it seamlessly through RDP underneath Linux, meaning that if you wanted to run things like Microsoft Word, it would run as if it was operating natively on your system. Now, these guys have been hard at work on this project too, and they've been working towards something interesting, which is GPU acceleration, meaning that, you know, down the road, if there are certain games, maybe older games, maybe programs, maybe editing software that you want to fuck around with, you could actually use it underneath something like Winboat. Again, it takes time for this shit to develop. But the development is actually really happening. Look, as much as I brought up the DHH example, I think a more important example, something that more is germane to gamers, is something from Epic Games. Now, if you guys haven't been hearing, for the last, month, this is actually a pretty big news. This is actually huge shit. Epic Games is actually thinking of bringing their launcher over to Linux, somewhere I think maybe next year or maybe even this year, right? And you might be like, well, what's the big deal about it, right? The big deal about this is that Epic Games was one of those companies where I think for a while they were very anti-Linux. It wasn't they were just definitely not fucking around with anything Linux related. Valve was the Linux guys and Epic Games was just ignoring the elephant in the room. And the big thing about this here, for a while, you could play Epic Games underneath your system. I ran something called Heroic Games Launcher, which allowed me to play my entire Epic library on my Linux system. But having something official means a lot more. GOG, a site that I promote, because they give you DRM-free games, is finally looking at making native Linux launchers, which native software is always the intended goal here, right? It's not about, can we have Proton 100 years into the future and just keep it going? Proton is important because the only way Linux gains any popularity is if people can actually play their games and run their software underneath it. If you can't do those things, this whole operating system just remains a hobbyist's wet dream. The only reason I talk more and more about Linux on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis, is because it's genuinely getting so much better over the last several years that I can't not promote it, right? Is it perfect? Fuck no. Are there games that I enjoy and I play that don't work underneath Linux? Yeah. There's games like Grand Theft Auto Online. There's games like Rainbow Six Siege. There's games like Marathon. There are games like Battlefield 6. There are games like League of Legends that I can't play because guess what? I mean, first off, I'm glad I can't play League of Legends, but I can't play those games because they have really dirty anti-cheat, and the anti-cheat is only compatible with Windows. But this is where things are also changing. Epic Games is hiring people that are senior security engineers whose jobs will include championing Linux anti-cheat capabilities for Epic, reverse engineering cheats and other malicious software, deep knowledge of Linux and operating systems internals. So the important aspect about this here is that Linux is growing and it's becoming more relevant in gaming and just home users, that companies like Epic are realizing that there is now a non-zero, there is now a amount of player base that they are not willing to necessarily ignore. Whether people are playing on desktop computers like me, whether people are strictly on the Steam Deck or handheld gaming PCs, Linux users are becoming more relevant. And there's a reason why companies like Epic are considering hiring out people that can gauge their anti-cheats here. Look, most of the online games that I play now are shit like World of Warcraft because it runs underneath Linux. I don't necessarily care much about Fortnite, but I would be fucking happy if Fortnite could show up on Linux because guess what? If Linux is going to ever gain popularity, it has to have the same parity of software, Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't play Fortnite, but you know what? Millions of people play Fortnite. The only game that I can't play this year on my computer is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4. Not particularly because it can't run underneath Linux's Proton. It can. It's just that the anti-cheat doesn't let you. Now, do I care much about Modern Warfare 4? Fuck no. But millions of people do, right? And so for those millions of individuals, having that option available means that getting rid of Windows becomes that much more easier, right? If tonight Linux could finally run the entire Adobe Creative Cloud, if Linux could run every post-production software in existence, I would never need to use the Macintosh behind me at all, because whenever I edit my videos, whenever I put together graphics, whenever I do anything of that nature, it's always directly through Macs. If the same software could run underneath Linux, that's one less reason for me to own that laptop behind me. Over the last 3 years, my usage of Windows has completely decimated. The only times that I really have ever touched Windows was when I was emulating PS5 stuff. And at the time that I started emulating those PS5 games, guess what? Those emulators are now fully functioning underneath Linux anyways. It is an insane level of support this operating system has gotten. And I guess, really, at the end of the day, is it finally the year of the Linux desktop? I say probably not. And the reason I say it is that the only way for this to fully reach the conclusion is that Linux doesn't become something that can run 95% of what you see on Windows, because it's already there, right? But the 5% that remains are genuinely the software that are used by millions of people around the world. And the only way to finish that is finally when Linux becomes so much more adopted that companies like Epic, which they've already shown they can't ignore any longer, when companies like even Microsoft, that I've been playing their newest Gears of War E-Day entirely underneath Linux, even Microsoft has to at least acknowledge that Linux is an important force and not boot people out. Are there still shitty developers that don't allow Linux into online servers? Sure. And you know what I do with those, developers? I just don't buy their games. Like, I'm on this arc of mine where I just play mostly single player stuff and MMOs these days. And occasionally when there are shooters that I'm interested in, yeah, I'll just play them on PC underneath a Linux Proton layer. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. But I found that most of the games that are coming out now, there is a lot of support given to Linux gamers, and it's actually pretty heartwarming to see. Will it finally come full circle? I think maybe in the next couple years. Honestly, by the time GTA 6 ends up dropping on PC, I really think there's some serious advancements to be made. But let me know what you think. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.